Welcome to Tutor Boot, where each week I'm joined by thought leaders to talk about news related to the world of work. We toot what we like and boot what we don't like. I'm your host, Stacey Nordwall, and I'm a world of work nerd with about 20 years experience in HR and ops, mostly building people functions from the ground up at early stage tech companies. And I am joined today by Amira Barger. Welcome, Amira.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure. I'm excited to dive in and hear your thoughts about the book.
I know, I'm really excited about this. This is another one where I took a lot of notes. So before we dig in, for folks who aren't familiar with you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I often describe myself as a behavioral communications consultant, professor, author, and your fearlessly authentic bestie.
Love
And
it.
I get to spend my day using the tools of communications to help give people the tool sets and the skill sets they need, and also reimagine their mindsets so that they can take different actions in the world of work and just in the world in general, so that we can reimagine the place that we all get to operate in or live in together. So let's make it palatable and a place where we can thrive. At least more of us can thrive. There's some thriving, and let's expand that so that others can feel the same as well.
Absolutely. Fabulous. We're doing things a little bit different because it is another book club edition of Tutor Boot. So I'm excited for that. I'm so grateful that you've joined to talk about the new book. I had the good fortune of meeting Amira earlier this year. Shout out to Torrin Ellis for hosting an event that brought us together, and was excited when we talked more and found out we had a lot of similar interests in terms of like psychology and communications. At the time, you had told me about this book that was going to be coming out, and I said, we absolutely need to get you on the show when it was released. And that was just a few weeks ago. And I think for psych nerds like me, you're going to love all the psychology and sociology concepts layered throughout this book. And the added bonus for pop culture nerds like me is all of the pop culture references that are in the book. And I mean, I feel like it was all of what was it? The Venn diagram was everything that was me in the middle of all of the things that I
Nice.
enjoy.
I love
I
it.
think people are going to love this. You get all of those kind of great sociology, psychology concepts that are explained, and they're grounded in examples from pop culture or examples that are really relatable from the workplace. So I think it makes it really easy to engage with and understand. Amira's book is The Price of Nice: Why Comfort Keeps Us Stuck and Four Actions for Real Change. I want to start from the top. What is the price of nice? How do you think about niceness, and what's the harm in being nice?
Yeah, so much harm. I didn't come out of the womb quiet. I was a kid that asked big questions. I colored outside the lines, and I was often in trouble for it. And yet, somewhere along the way, I became also precious sweet Amira. In fact, my late mother in law, Pearl, she used to call me that as if it were my full government name. And other people picked it up. And for many years, I wore it as this badge of honor. But for me, the first crack in that badge happened actually in my mom's bedroom with two blonde haired twins and some very tragic vacation hair. So my sisters and I, our best friends growing up were these blonde, hazel eyed twins. And every summer they'd come back from vacation with their braids, like the little cornrows and the beads on the end, and their scalps were red and peeling from the sunburn. And within a week, they'd be on my mom's floor begging her to redo their hair. And my mom would definitely sit there, part their fine hair. And there was a lot of howling of like, ouch, that's too tight. And is my hair falling out? And just one day, at the time I was 9, little 9-year-old Amira, she was done with the theatrics. And I just blurted out finally, it's because your hair isn't made for braids. And the room went silent. And my mom kind of snapped and said, Amira, that's not nice. And for me, that was a lesson that really stuck with me when I thought back on when's the first time I could imagine nice having been put forward to me in the way that I am trying to deposit it in this book to others. That when truth causes discomfort, the truth teller becomes the problem. That is the lesson that I
Mm.
took that day. And so that's what I mean when I say in the book that niceness is a velvet glove over an iron fist.
Mm,
It looks and seems soft and polite, but it's meant to control us, and it can really pack a punch that hurts. And
mm,
it teaches us to protect feelings, usually someone else's. And in the book, I write that niceness, I said, quietly settles in and trains us to be agreeable instead of honest and palatable instead of powerful. So the harm in being nice is that I don't want people to think kindness is wrong. We're still aiming for kindness, which is different from nice. The harm is when niceness requires self abandonment and
mhm,
when the price of everyone else's comfort is your dignity, your honesty, your humanity, because that's too expensive.
mhm. Yeah, and to your point, it keeps people, it's kind of shut up, essentially, in a way of like,
Basically,
be
yeah,
quiet.
absolutely.
Yeah. And you talk about I don't want to say the opposite. I don't know that it's necessarily an opposite. It's a counterweight, I guess, maybe to call it,
Mhm.
is nerve. So I would love for you to share with folks about this nice versus nerve and the continuum.
Yes, the continuum that you'll see in the book is really, I think, my life on a spectrum, what I've experienced and been unpacking for the last however many years. On one end is nice. That's the precious sweet Amira years, the era where I learned that if I smoothed things over and smiled and didn't make waves, that I would be rewarded. And
Mm,
niceness became a survival strategy, which is, I think, how many of us still use it today and tap into it. It was about, again, protecting feelings, keeping the surface calm, even if underneath you're boiling or writhing. And on the other end of this spectrum is the antithesis nerve. Nerve is that part of me that has always been there. The girl who told the twins, your hair's not made for braids. And the woman who looked at a dream job once upon a time and said no. And the mother today who lets her daughter tell the truth out loud. And I think about sitting with my daughter it was in 2022 during the Senate Judiciary Committee hearings for Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Actually, my daughter was 9, and we wanted her to have this moment, right? This was meant to be a moment of pride and history, the first Black woman nominated to the highest court in the land.
hmm
And instead, what she saw that day, if anyone has watched it and it's still on YouTube, you can go back, she was interrupted a lot and disrespected and expected to really smile through what was happening and the way she was being questioned. And at one point, my daughter actually asked, why is she being interrupted? And why isn't anyone doing anything about it? And then she actually asked me, can I say a word I'm not supposed to? And I said, yes, because I was intrigued.
Mm.
And she said, isn't he kind of being a jerk? Speaking about one of the Congress people who was questioning Ketanji Brown Jackson that day. And my little 9-year-old didn't have the vocabulary for misogyny,
Mm.
oppression, workplace abuse yet.
Yeah.
But she innately and naturally felt and saw the wrongness of what was happening.
Yeah.
And actually later, CBS Bay Area called us and said, hey, mom and daughter, we want to interview and talk
Mm.
about that moment. And the reporter looked at my 9-year-old and asked her, how did, Senator Ted Cruz, it was, make you feel when he was questioning Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson? And my little 9-year-old looked at the camera and said, Ted Cruz is a bastard.
Well, she graduated from jerk pretty quickly.
She did. And that is nerve. The point of that story is that is nerve. My 9-year-old was
Yeah.
able to name what she was seeing and to say it and acknowledge it, even when it's uncomfortable, which I think many adults struggle to do today. So on the continuum, nice says, don't upset anyone.
hmm
Neutral tries to pretend that you're not involved. But nerve says, if harm is happening in front of me, I'm not going to sit here and do nothing. And our workplaces, I think, are overinvested in nice and neutral, and we need a whole lot more nerve. Be like
Yeah.
my 9-year-old.
Yeah. I love that. Plus, also, swearing is just one of my, I love it more than anything else.
Me
So
too.
that story especially just warms my heart.
I love it. Same, same.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So this is a kind of a long quote, but this is something that I want to dig into more. You say in the book, corporate culture conditions us to suppress discomfort and avoid conversations that disrupt this illusion of harmony. We are expected to adhere to a quote unquote professional decorum that separates our personal lives from our work. This unspoken requirement to compartmentalize, to keep our personal beliefs, values, and even struggles out of the workplace lies at the heart of performative niceness in corporate spaces. The compartmentalization of our identities reinforces the illusion that harmony can be achieved by avoiding difficult topics, as though our professional and personal selves could or should exist in isolation. Yet we are not merely workers performing a role, but individuals whose lives, opinions, experiences, and identities inevitably bleed into our professional spaces. Forced separation of the personal and professional is neither natural nor sustainable or even desirable. In fact, research by Harvard professor Amy Edmondson underscores that genuine collaboration and innovation rely on psychological safety, the belief that we can show up fully, speak honestly, and challenge norms without fear of retribution. So that is the quote. I feel like there is this common refrain about keeping politics out of work, keeping
Mhm.
identities out of work. And this quote speaks to why that isn't really possible. And I'd love for you to share more about why bringing these identities, bringing, politics into the workplace is beneficial.
Ooh, big, scary, big P politics, right? I actually think right back to the story I just told, Ketanji Brown Jackson. Now, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, that moment was a work moment, right? That is her job. That
Mm,
was an interview on the largest possible stage. And politics, identity, race, gender, power, all of it walked into that room with her, whether anyone wanted to name it or not, or accept it or not. And so when people say keep politics out of work, what they often mean is your reality makes me uncomfortable. Please don't bring it over here.
mm,
Truth is, what I wrote in the book, corporate culture teaches us to suppress discomfort and compartmentalize to separate who we are at home from who we are at work. And that forced separation definitely is a performance that we are asked to participate in. And the thing is, I'm a Black woman. Ketanji Brown Jackson's a Black woman. I don't become less Black. Someone else doesn't become less queer. Someone else doesn't become less disabled, less immigrant, less impacted by policy the moment they log into Teams, Zoom, or cross the threshold of the office door. We are whole people walking into workplaces that pretend wholeness is optional. The business case comes up a lot. And because I'm still a comms and DEI girl at heart, Amy Edmondson's research that you mentioned on psychological safety speaks to how people need that space to show up fully as they choose to. And so bringing our identities into the workplace isn't about making everything political.
mm,
It is about making everything human. And being human is, in this world and the way we've constructed it, is itself political.
mm,
And we can't force people to chop themselves up into professional versus personal. We will get better ideas, better decisions, and frankly, better leaders when we accept people as their fully chosen self in every space they enter.
organizations don't get to pick and choose the things about you that they want. Like, oh, I like this part of you. I like your creativity. But if your creativity comes from your experiences and any of these, well, we don't want that part. You had mentioned earlier about organizations really focusing more on niceness and neutrality. And that's something that
Mhm.
I wanted to dig into more because you have a note on neutrality in your book. And
Mhm.
I feel like, especially in the HR world and where we have organizations like SHRM that are talking about the need for civility, quote unquote,
Mhm.
that a lot of HR folks tend to kind of push toward this idea of neutrality. Let's not take a stance. Let's not have politics in the workplace. To your
Mhm.
point, keeping things nice. And I would love for you to share more about your perspective on why you don't believe that this kind of neutrality in the workplace is achievable or even perhaps desirable.
Yeah. Neutrality definitely gets marketed as wisdom
Mm,
my whole career. That is how I have had it described to me, as professionalism, as staying above the fray,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're in HR. But there's a line that I come back to often. There's an essay that Naomi Schulman wrote in 2016 after the first election of the current person who's president in America. One of the things that she wrote was that nice people made the best Nazis, not
Mm.
because they were villains in their own heads, but because they refused to speak up. They stayed out of politics while their neighbors were literally dragged away. And you should definitely read her essay. It's in WBUR, Naomi Schulman, 2016. But that is what neutrality does. It protects the status quo, not the vulnerable. And in the book, I do talk about the 2024 presidential election when Kamala Harris lost to Donald Trump, and CEOs rushed to release statements about civility and unity and moving forward. And what they did not do was hold space for the fear, the rage, and the grief of employees whose rights and safety are on the line. Instead, people like me were expected to show up to work the very next day as if our lives were not on the ballot and didn't just shift immediately with the shift of leadership. And I write that when civility becomes this shield for complacency, it enables structures of harm to stay intact, to encourage this passive tolerance of injustices that ultimately compromise the safety, dignity, and humanity of so many individuals. And to me, what I want people to remember is that neutrality is itself a decision.
Mm.
Indecision is a decision. And when someone in power says, I'm staying neutral, what they're really saying is, I am more invested in my comfort than in your safety. And it's not okay.
I think as you're talking too, one of the things that I'm thinking about, because I feel like kind of comes into play around AI, is
Yeah.
that when people say neutral, I think underneath that is like, okay, well, objective, like new somehow that those
Mhm.
are the same. But to your point, selecting neutrality isn't being objective. Like there is still something, the status quo, there is somebody's comfort that is being centered there. So
Yes.
neutrality isn't neutral anyway.
No, it's not. That's what I want people to remember. We've gotten away from remembering that and from distorting definitions.
Yeah. There's another quote, and again, I don't want to keep harping on Sherm, but Sherm, if you're listening,
Right?
this
Act
quote.
right. Change your ways. We're watching.
Yes, exactly. This quote I wanted to read as well. So you say, the underlying and undeniable truth is that when civility becomes a shield for complacency, it enables structures of harm to remain intact, encouraging a passive tolerance of injustices that ultimately compromise the safety, dignity, and humanity of countless individuals. You go on to say, we are told to prioritize productivity over personhood, harmony over truth, and comfort over accountability. But that version of civility, one that sidesteps hard truths in favor of an artificial calm, reinforces the very systems that prevent us from achieving true justice and equality. And the reason that I especially wanted to pull this out is because SHRM, you see this org, they're meant to represent HR. They remove equity from their pillars. They
Yes.
change their inclusion conference to a blueprint conference. And their whole thing since the election has been we need civility in the workplace. And what you're saying here is kind of what a lot of folks are pushing back on is, hey, Sherm, this is not actually helping. But folks are like, well, what's wrong with being civil? What's wrong with civility? So I kind of wanted to have you dig in a little bit more on that as well of like, yeah, tell us more about this, about civility being really more about complacency.
Yeah. I mean, I think the answer is pretty straightforward in my mind. My response to people when they say, what's wrong with civility, is there is nothing wrong with respect. We still prioritize that. We want that. There is, however, everything wrong with a culture and a set of leaders that requires the people who are harmed to be gentle
Mm.
while they are being harmed, or to be polite about the ways in which you are oppressed and harmed.
Uh-huh.
That's wild behavior. And
Yeah.
that is in so many words and in so many actions, what these leaders, what SHRM is asking of us. If I'm experiencing racism or sexism at work, and HR's priority is that I bring it up in a civil way on their timeline, in their tone,
Yeah.
that's not about healing and helping. That's about control. That's
Yeah.
about tone policing. It's about making sure that, my pain and experience doesn't disturb someone's meeting.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
That's wild behavior to me.
Yeah. Yep. And it's so funny 'cause this is one of my kind of foundational work experiences. And
Mhm.
when I think back on it, it makes me wonder, I guess maybe it's both the reason for and against me becoming an HR person, but
Mm,
I had a manager who very clearly was engaged in a lot of like misogynistic behaviors, had
mm,
multiple women throughout the organization report him. And I distinctly remember the HR person in pulling me out of the meeting saying that, to your point, like I was not talking about my experience in an appropriate way in this meeting. And I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me.
that part.
Like, I'm the one that's the problem in this situation.
So quick they will turn it on you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You made someone uncomfortable. You are the problem.
Right. It's like,
Can
oh, but this started because he was the one making multiple people uncomfortable.
we focus on keeping the main thing the main thing? The
Yeah.
main thing is his behavior. This is wrong. Yes,
Oh
it
my
will
God.
so quickly shift on a dime to turn it. What is it? The Darvo. I always forget exactly what all the words, but it's like reversing the order of the victim and the
Oh,
abuser.
that makes a lot of sense of what you're saying. A lot of these things, the thread of what you're talking about in the book, niceness, civility, these can all be kind of used to switch around and turn it back on to the person who's
Yes,
actually experiencing the harm or trying to call something out that is harmful. And it's just a way to pivot it back and get them to be silent, essentially.
yes. And Darvo, I just looked up because I wanted to get it right. Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender.
Mm-hmm.
Not
It's not great that there's like a whole acronym for that.
There is, because there are so many users and abusers out there that we had to come up with some frameworks to help those who are on the receiving end put language to what they're experiencing so we can
Yeah.
push back against it. But it's so often what happens in the workplace. Not okay.
Yeah. I want to shift a little bit more and kind of start talking about some of the tools that you have for folks, the
Mhm.
frameworks, some of those things. So, in the book, you mentioned the need for both advocacy and inquiry. And I thought this was really interesting because pretty much every leadership training I go to, it's like advocacy, building influence, being able to build your business case. But you hear really very little about the inquiry side. So,
Mm.
I'd love for you to share more about what inquiry is and why both advocacy and inquiry are needed.
Yes, you're right. We are often told to make the case, make your argument, get buy-in. And I'm a comms professional. I love a good argument. I love to make the case. Sure, absolutely. But advocacy without inquiry is, I think, just a louder monologue, it's just more noise.
Mm,
And so, inquiry to me is the muscle that we have neglected. And I talk a lot in my work as a comms professional and a change management professional that we use inquiry as a strategy. And so inquiry asks, what am I missing? How might this land on someone else who is not in this room but affected by this decision? It is that curiosity without the agenda of being right. And
mm,
there's a couple of times that I reference in the book, ladies who lunch.
mm,
It goes back to my era in nonprofit fundraising and communications, which is, where I started my career. I spent a decade doing that work. And there was this beloved gala and fashion show that we would throw every year. And for 15 years, these women proudly told people, we have raised $3.5 million. And it was the ladies who launched, many women with wealth, whose, in many cases, their job, if you will, is professional volunteer. And so
Yeah.
they'd volunteer at our organization. And so they were telling people, we've raised $3.5 million, and it sounded impressive until I started newly at the organization and I ran the numbers and realized that they raised 3.5 million, but the event also cost us 3 million.
Uh-huh.
Thank you for the appropriate response you just had. It's the only appropriate response. And so the net impact was not what they believed it was. And I don't even think they actually believed it. It's just a story they were spinning. It was really good PR at the
Yeah.
time. And advocacy in that moment might have been simply stomping into our next meeting with them and saying, we're shutting this event down. But instead, I started with inquiry. What is it that you love about this gala and the volunteer work you do with us? What impact do you believe it's having?
Mm.
What would it mean to you if we could double the impact of your volunteerism and work with us? And once they felt seen, there was a bit more room for the harder truths that I needed to lay out for them.
Hmm.
So the point is not to choose advocacy or inquiry. It's to braid them together and
Hmm.
advocate for what you know is right and inquire as if you might still be wrong. Right?
Hmm.
That's the trait of a good leader, is to be able to say, I've been wrong about some things, and to keep holding space for that truth.
I like that. I like that a lot too, because I do feel like the message to HR folks is always, you don't know the business well enough. You're not strategic enough. You
Mhm.
don't know how to build a business case. So I like this idea of having both and being able to ask really good questions is important
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, it's a skill set in and of itself. There's this book called The Tao of Coaching, and it has a really great framework for how to inquire and ask really good questions. And it's a skill set that I think more leaders need to hone and practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of which, you have a model, which is the 4WH model. And I really liked that because it felt very much like an opening of a real conversation, a real discussion, real introspection, as opposed to almost closed and leading questions. Like these
Yeah.
are meant to be open and exploratory. So I would love for you to talk about that model.
Yes, the 4WH model is a practical tool that I gained from a leadership program. I'm like a collector of leadership and fellowship programs. I love them. I will always sign up. So I was at one, it was a year-long program called Women in Leadership with Coro, Northern California, up here, where they equip business leaders. Amazing people like Nancy Pelosi, Gavin Newsom have graduated from similar programs up here in Northern California. And once a month, they get all 30 of us in our cohort together, and we would just build on the mindsets, skill sets, and tool sets that we needed to be effective leaders in our organizations. And this was one of my favorite ones. So thank you and shout out to Coro, Northern California, for this. But this is my way of giving people a structure when their instinct is either to shut down or to bulldoze. And so this model walks you through what happened, who was affected, why does it matter, what helps, and how do we move forward. But the model also focuses on helping people understand that the 4W, who, what, where, when, how, and the H are more powerful questions than simply why. Why is usually one of the last questions we ask because it assumes a lot and it doesn't elicit as much conversation and data, information from the person you're in relationship with. And this model makes me think of a story I write about in the book. I call it the back row barrier story. So as people dig in, they'll hear that one. But I had these two brilliant women on my team who had done the deep work on this massive initiative. And it was this really rare chance to present to the board of directors. They didn't often hear from junior staff or even meet them.
Mm.
And my two staff members who really earned their seats. And moments before the meeting, another senior colleague, a peer of mine, told them, you have to sit at the back row, a bunch of chairs that we set against the wall. Even though we had this giant board of directors table, we could seat like 50 people. There were more than enough seats. But he told
Mm.
them, you get to sit at the back row behind everyone, not at the table, which to me immediately just brings up these visuals of exactly what so many people, and especially women in the workplace, experience of there are enough seats at the table. You're just not allowed there. And he told them literally, just be grateful to be in the room. And the
Mm.
4WH model helped me keep my reaction in that moment from becoming pure rage. And so, yeah,
Uh,
I asked myself, what happened? Okay, they were sidelined. Who is affected? Not just them, but every junior person who's watching this moment, and how I react and how they react and what happens next. Why does it matter? Because it teaches them that visibility without voice is the best that they can hope for, which is gross.
mm.
And then what helps? Correcting it in real time. That's what I decided. And then lastly, how do we move forward? Well, in my mind, they sit at the table, and this colleague gets clear feedback from me about what he had just done. And so he
Yes.
did. I marched over to his office that morning. I told my team, take a walk around the block, go downstairs, get some coffee, do what you need to shake it off. I'm going to handle this. And I corrected it in real time. And at that day, they sat at the table.
Mhm.
They presented their work. And to me, that's perfectly assertive communication, which is actually a leadership tool and model that people can dig into more. And I mentioned it in the book, but the perfectly assertive communication in action, guided by those 4WH questions. It turns a moment of harm into a moment of how to model nerve.
Yeah, that was the perfectly assertive communication because as I was reading a lot of this, I was thinking to myself, there have been times when I did try to shake the status quo and I did stand up and point something out or say something. And I don't know if it was, maybe I didn't do it effectively. Maybe I didn't have the right tools. Maybe it wouldn't matter what I did. Like that's also an option.
Often.
But I liked the idea of these questions and the perfectly assertive communication because it was like, okay, maybe there is a way to not do the bull in the china shop of like, this is bullshit, like, what are we doing here, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
a better way to do that.
Yes, because people get scared when I talk about nerve. That's why I had to write the book, because nerve isn't always loud, rebellious, throw the tea in the water, burn it all down, flip the tables. Sometimes that's the nerve we need. And there are some people brave enough for that nerve. We all get to play a role, and there are people for that. In our workplaces today, in the year of 2025, the kind of nerve I'm asking people to practice is that perfectly assertive communication, which often looks like micro actions, right?
Mm,
I took a micro action that morning of I corrected it in the moment. I could have waited, right? I could have said, fine, let's shake it off. We'll handle it later and just go into the meeting. But I chose in that moment. I said no, because people are watching, and these two women on my team are watching, and I cannot have them leave today thinking that visibility without voice is the best that they can hope for.
mhm.
That's not good leadership. And so that micro action of let me correct this in real time and make sure they have that seat at the table. And I'll deal with the discomfort of this colleague being upset, blah, 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 later. And that's mine to bear as a leader.
Mhm.
So sometimes I need people to remember it can be a micro action. When someone interrupts someone in the morning, actually, I was really interested in what Stacy was saying. Can we circle back? Stacy, share a little bit more. That's
Mhm.
a small act of nerve that everyone
Yeah.
has the ability to do.
Yeah. I love that you're pointing that out too, because I think that is kind of the natural thing for people to be like, oh, I got to
Yeah.
do something major and big and loud, and like I'm not comfortable doing that, or whatever it is. So there are these smaller actions that people can take. And I think in these times, especially, I feel like people are there's a lot to push back on. And we are also in a climate where people are very worried about their jobs and being able to pay bills. So I think that's a good example. I don't know if you have more advice for folks on how to kind of navigate having nerve in a situation where things feel very unstable and possibly scary.
I worked with a woman who was really good at practicing nerve and being the person to push. Like the person who would say, these hiring practices are biased. This policy harms caregivers. This doesn't work for enough people. And she was one who would constantly run into like this barrier of
Mm,
no, you're difficult, be quiet, shut up. And
hmm.
one day, after she had practiced nerve yet again, we caught each other in the hall and she was just like defeated and exhausted of just, maybe I
Yeah.
should just stop caring so much. I can't. And one of the things I talk about in the book, I call it the Red Rover recoil. And I talk about the children's game Red Rover, Red Rover, send Amira on over. And the Red Rover recoil is something that I think of as the moment that your body remembers that exhaustion of you've been running, 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 and trying to hit the wall and break through, and you just can't, and you're bruised and you're bleeding and you're tired and your body's asking you, oh my God, please, not again, not again. And I try to remind people that experiencing that recoil is not a failure.
Mm,
That if you are the person who is always practicing nerve, always charging ahead, always trying to break the line or even hold the line, you will get tired. You will get exhausted. You do actually need rest. And so, what I
mm,
said to this colleague who was the person who was so good at constantly trying to break through and run hard and fast is this work is a relay.
mm,
Hand me the baton today. I got it. You did your part. Hand me the baton today. I'll hand it to someone else the next. You go rest because we need you in this fight and we won't have you anymore if you don't rest.
hmm.
And I do think that there are a lot of people, I think because of the climate we're in, where people will say things like silence is complicity, all of those things. It's not that those things aren't true, but we can hold multiple things true of you also need rest.
Yeah.
There's also a thing called strategic silence where we
Mm,
move behind the scenes. And so, all that to say is, I want people to remember that this work is a relay. And in a climate of backlash,
yeah.
make sure that you have other people on the team to pass the baton to. Make sure you are resting and don't beat yourself up for needing that rest. That is actually a part of the work is rest and letting someone else run a leg of the relay as well.
I really love that because being in the time that we're in now, we've seen so many DEI programs leave. There's so much backlash against all of this stuff. A lot of the things, I think, even though they're simple and it shouldn't be a
Mm,
problem, like lead with curiosity, ask questions. I mean, a number of the things that you're talking about in your book, I think a good DEI program, a good DEI leader would be bringing these kinds of practices into the workplace. And now that there's like backlash against even the mention of it, there's somewhat
yeah.
of a fear or recoiling from it in a lot of companies. How do we still push forward with some of this? And I think what you're saying about having people on your team, looking at it like a relay and trying to still push forward is one thing that people can kind of hold on to and take away in a place, a time when it feels like there's so much backlash against even the simplest things. If they have the hint of the whiff of DEI on them, it becomes problematic. How do
Mhm.
we put into practice in our workplaces some of these really useful and helpful things?
I think it's really important for people to remember to focus on your immediate world because there are some areas where you do have power and control, right? The big DEI, capital DEI, it's very scary to practice that right now. But let's say you are a manager to two or three people. A very simple thing you can do is let's say there are some on your team who are caregivers or parents or caregivers to their parents. You can practice DEI in your relationship with them and for them. Like, hey, I understand that you need to work remote a few more days than others because of the responsibilities you have. You know what? There's a grace period. Your day starts, if you're in the office anytime before 10 a.m., you don't need to notify me. I don't care. Get here
Mm.
when you get here. Live your life. Do you. So find
Yeah.
the areas where you do have control. Look at your immediate world because too often people think that those things are small. And that's why I use the phrase micro actions and try not to say small is they are micro actions, but those micro actions add up and they can change the experience and the world for a multitude of people and it ripples outward. So
Mm,
look to your immediate world. What can you control? How can you show up as a good human
mm,
to care for the humans around you immediately? That's part of how we get where we need to go, right? Your company may not have an entire policy on X, Y, or Z, but maybe there's something you can do very simply for your immediate team and the immediate people around you that is care, that is inclusion, that creates a space for them to thrive. And in this moment where it is a very scary time to do any DEI work, that's what I think we have to go back to right now. Keep
mm.
doing the work in your immediate sphere of influence. And we're going to get back to it writ large. We are, we're still
Yeah.
in this fight.
Yeah.
The pendulum swings back and forth. So
Yeah.
just keep doing it in your immediate sphere of influence.
Fabulous. Yeah. I like that advice as well because I think, especially social media with constant notifications, it's easy to get overwhelmed. And if you think about, oh, I am not doing this thing to end hunger in America. Okay, you're just going to spiral and like freak out. What can I do
Yes,
in my own sphere of it? Can I donate something to my local community? Okay, great.
that's it.
Like bring
Can I
it.
feed one neighbor? Can I
Yeah.
volunteer and sort food at the food bank?
Yeah.
There are so many things you can do. We all have a part to play. Play your part.
Yeah.
That's a part of the larger tapestry. And yes, that is enough. Just keep playing your part. Don't stop.
Yeah. We're going to wrap up. We've got to do some toots and boots. So I I want to just ask through this whole experience of writing the book, publishing it, starting to hear back from people about what
Mm,
they thought about it, what resonated with them, what has felt toot worthy or boot worthy about this experience?
man, I do hear from people, and it does still surprise me every time. And I think that means we're not in community enough. But people saying things like, I thought it was just me when it comes to some of the audacious stories that I tell in these talks or on podcasts, or for those who have read the book, people who will say things like, I didn't realize being nice was actually costing me this much. And that's been really, I think, affirming to hear is that there's unfortunately a common experience we're having. But what I'm hopeful for with this book is that people now have some of the language and the tools to show up differently and to push back. And I think the more people read the book, the more people there will be who are ready to receive nerve. And I think that's part of the problem why not enough of us practice it, because not enough people are ready to receive it because they don't know what it is. They just will label you difficult, not
Mm,
collaborative, the squeaky wheel,
yeah.
always asking questions instead of making decisions, or whatever they
Yeah.
like to say about the disruptors and the challengers, the truth tellers in places and spaces. So naming something, I felt like people finally feel like they have the language for it and no, you're not alone. Like, unfortunately, this is a widespread experience.
Yes. All right. Well, I mean, thank you so much for joining. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm hoping that folks will go out and get the book, but I want to give you a chance. Tell people where they can follow you, where they can
Yeah.
contact you, where to get the book, all of those things.
Beautiful. Okay, amirabarger.com. I have a website, and all the links to your favorite places to buy books are there. And I'm also at Amira Barger on all of the socials. I try to keep it really simple. It's just my name, at Amira Barger. TikTok and LinkedIn is where I'm most active, but I'm also on Instagram and Blue Sky. So find me there.